Fashion in the 1920s. In the early 1900s, women's wear moved away from Victorian fashion to Edwardian fashion. Some key characteristics included corsets, high necklines, and women wearing layered garments with dramatic silhouettes. After the Victorian era, Edwardian fashion became popular. They had less restrictive corsets and were a bit more comfortable than Victorian dresses. It also emphasized the S-figure silhouette instead of the Victorian strict hourglass. These dresses were both very modest and the length of their skirts went down to their ankles.
The Gibson Girls was created by Charles Dana Gibson, and this type of fashion was worn in the 1890s to the 1910s. She was portrayed as the American ideal woman. As you can see in this picture, they had big updos and soft but bold features. They were independent and active, moving beyond the stereotypical woman should be at home singing. However, there were not many Gibson girls because it was an insult to be one. New women were not embraced by society.
Now compare these two photos from before the 1920s to during the 1920s.
Coco Chanel was a French woman born in 1883. She was the first woman fashion designer. Throughout her early life, she lived in poverty with her family in the French countryside. After her mom died in 1895, she was sent to an orphanage where she learned how to sew. Later in her life, she became a seamstress with the skills she acquired, working in as a cafe as a singer. She met a former army officer, Esteem Wilson, who helped her start off her millinery business, Chanel Modes. She later opened a boutique in Deauville, where she began selling the very things that changed fashion forever.
Coco Chanel's fashion consisted of using men's jersey that was used for underwear, transforming the fabric into practical garments that were also elegant. She also turned French sailor uniforms into high-fashion women's wear, making stripes popular. Coco Chanel also changed how women wore restricted corsets by making sportswear that were much more comfortable and free. They were also less straining on the human body. Her designs reflected her belief in power of simplicity and luxury. Coco Chanel's work has changed the fashion industry and influenced the way women understood style and comfort in clothing.
Another woman who changed fashion in the 1920s was Josephine Baker. Background: where was she from? Freda Josephine Baker was born in 1906 in Missouri. She was an American and a French dancer, singer, and actress. She grew up in a racially mixed low-income area in Chestnut Valley neighborhood of St. Louis, where she was poorly dressed and hungry. Growing up, she had witnessed racial violence around her as she huddled with the other children. Her father was unknown, and her mother did not like that she decided to become an entertainer. Despite all these challenges of her childhood, she still held onto her dream and continued to be a star.
Her wardrobe consisted of feathers, sequins, beads, and beautiful fabrics that made her look wonderful when she danced. For one of her performances, she wore a banana skirt, challenging how women were supposed to be modest and push the boundaries of fashion. She wore daring outfits that made her stand out from the crowd and made her a muse for designers. She was nicknamed the Muse of Dior because of her close friend, Christian Dior, as she was a popular customer.
Both of Coco Chanel and Josephine Baker's legacy today. Even to this day, Coco Chanel and Josephine Baker's dedication to women's fashion affect our everyday clothing. They were symbols of resilience, cultural pioneering, in the civil rights movement.
A new group of girls called flappers arose during this time as well. They were the 1920s symbol of liberation. The term flappers originated in Britain to describe young, gawky teenage girls. It suggested how a fledgling bird learned how to fly. It evolved into a term for fashionable, pleasure-seeking new women who did not act in a way that was modest and normal. They defied traditional Victorian gender norms and often lived a liberated lifestyle. They smoked, drank, and could drive, and they also had nightlives. And they also enjoyed social freedom. They often dated, flirted in public, and experimented with relationships. However, many people of their time regarded them as outrageous, scandalous, and disgraceful for how they carried themselves.
They also expressed their freedom in the clothing that they wore. Skirts were no longer at the ankles, but at the calves and even to their thighs. They showed their legs, challenging the restrictive wear that had been put onto women's clothing for centuries. They often also wore heavy makeup, with lots of blush and very red lipstick, emphasizing their cupid's bow. Showing their confidence and boldness. Unlike the Victorian and Edwardian tradition of long hair, many flappers wear bobs. Their fashion and how they carry themselves were a rebellious statement of independence, freeing them from long stereotype. Their clothing allowed them to move freely as a symbol of their being able to be free to do what they wanted as well.
From the Victorian era to the 1920s, fashion changed as women began to gain more freedom. The restrictive clothing and tight corsets that limited their movement turned into comfortable bras and clothing that disregarded gender. Coco Chanel gave women more freedom and challenged stereotypes with her creations, and Josephine Baker showed who she was regardless of how society viewed African American women. Flappers also showed how women enjoyed their freedom, not just in clothing but also in how they acted. These women altered women's fashion for decades, even to this day.
The sources that are used is WWD, Historical Imperium, Chanel, Britannica, Nouveau Encyclopedia, History Extra, Olenka Lingerie, and Pouch of Fashion, CCN Style, Fashion History, Library of Congress, St. Louis Black Heritage Network, History Collection, and Fashion Research Collection.